All right, episode 42, Social Witnessing, with the host of the Self-Sufficient Hub podcast, our new friend Carl. What's up, Carl? Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you very much for having me.
Hey, how are you doing today?
Yeah, good. Beautiful weather we've got here in England. It's been dry and sunny and hot for several days, with several more to come, which is quite a rarity here, and I'm enjoying every minute of it.
For a minute, sarcastic, because we're in Vancouver, which we were just talking about, is
Oh,
very similar,
right.
but we have rain. We're raining sideways right now.
Oh, nightmare. But yeah, no, we've actually got beautiful. Like, if we had this day in the middle of our summer, we would say it was a good summer's day, and we've had several in a row, and we've got several more coming. So yeah, a gift.
Yeah, definitely. I'm just looking at a bird sheltering in the rain on a light pole right now. It's drowning out there.
But
Yeah.
you need
Yeah,
your
we
share of rain to appreciate the sun.
Yeah, and also we live in a very lush green place, so the rain has its place. It's needed.
Absolutely.
So tell us a little bit about what your COVID journey has. Before we come to the Self-Sufficient Hub, we usually like to ask what the journey's been like for everybody.
Sure.
Kind of take us back from the beginning to how the last few months have been.
Well, for me, I don't share my experiences with many people. I'm in a very, yeah, I mean, everybody's in a unique position, but I was in the process of going through some changes with work. So I'm a builder by trade, and we had a very big company that I owned very recently. We had about 60 staff, but I'd gone through a process of that company had basically failed through some fraudulent activity from another director, and we had just started another company which we just had 5 or 6 staff, and we were sort of getting that off the ground when the pandemic really sort of took hold in sort of February, March, and then all of a sudden the phone stopped ringing with new clients for work. But in addition to that, the jobs that we actually had booked in already rung up and basically one by one cancelled. So there's been I wouldn't even say a trickle. It's been quite a full stop to any kind of commercial activity I was doing outside of the house to raise any money. My wife works in a primary school, and we have 3 children. So there was obviously an impact there as well, because I don't know if you are familiar with the lockdown rules that we've got in the UK, or what we've been through in the UK with regards to legislation.
No, not
No.
specifically.
So basically, they shut down schools. I can't even remember when, but at some time towards the end of March, I believe. But the schools were never shut for the children of what we call key workers. So key workers would be people who work for the food supply chain or for the National Health Service, firemen, policemen, people like that. Their children were still housed at schools during the day. It was optional, but obviously some people took it up. So we were in a really weird position where our children were at home, but my wife was going to school to,
Mm.
work with other children. So that was a bit odd. Um, and then I suppose my wife, she's not a teacher, she's a teaching assistant. So it's quite a low paid job. So my income was most of the family's income. But fortunately, even though our income sort of dropped off a cliff, we've been working towards self-sufficiency here. And I know that's not what we're talking about right now, but it's a big part of our COVID journey, if you like, that we've got quite a lot going on at home, and we're pretty much able to support ourselves here without an income. Now, everybody needs an income because you've still got bills, you've still got, tax, council tax, and all sorts of bills. But in terms of just general day-to-day stuff, we don't really need to buy anything. So that was a huge relief. And I've kind of taken the the change in my personal circumstances as I'm trying to look at all the positives, and I'm using the time to throw myself into other things, because I was trying personally to move myself away from the construction industry, because it's not one that makes me particularly happy. It's not a place I like being. To own your own business and to make money and to do well in that industry, you can't, it's very difficult to do that and also be a nice person. And I like to think that I'm generally a nice person, and I find it difficult to maneuver in that business world because everybody's so fast to cut each other's throats, and that's not my, the
Mhm.
way I live. So I was already trying to move towards a future where I'm not working in that industry by doing some of the courses that I'm going to be teaching in the future and things like that. So I've been using the time to focus on that side of things.
Yeah, I can totally relate. I played poker professionally for about a decade,
Wow.
and as I kind of got older and we had a child, just kind of that sense of, anytime I'm winning, somebody else is losing, and I'm really just taking money out of other people's
Yep.
pockets when I'm doing
Sure.
well. Just something about that started to grind, and I can imagine it's even more so when you're dealing with people face to face and just can't go about it in a nice, respectful way, or at least other people aren't doing so back to
Yeah,
you.
that's right. It was more the latter, actually. It was more that you were, everybody you were dealing with was looking to take advantage however
Hmm.
they
Mhm.
could. And there are so many unscrupulous people in that industry that will say whatever they need to say to get you to give, and then do everything they can to not pay you at the end. Or and I'm talking about people within the industry, not just clients, but there are the odd client that that's like that as well. But yeah, it's just not a nice place to be. It's just not.
And so, how did you? Let's get to the self-sufficiency. How did that journey start? A couple of years ago, I think you said,
Yeah.
and where is it now?
Well, uh, basically, it just completely came out of the blue. So, 2 years ago, next month, my wife and I were living in a very, very standard, small 3 bedroom, semi detached house with a small garden, probably 5 meters by 15, 20 meters, something like that. And as you know, I was a builder, and there was or is a lady that I do quite a lot of work for, and she owns several properties. And I'd done work for her for a number of years, and I'd become very, very close to her. And so much so that we consider each other very close friends now. But anyway, 2 years ago, we were doing some work on a property that she owned, and we were renovating it with a view to her moving into it herself. And then what happened was, about 4 weeks before we were finished, her aunt passed away, and she decided, wow, that's the house I've always wanted. I'm going to buy that house and live in it instead. So, this house, that was one of several that this lady owned, was done up beautifully for her to move into. She didn't want to just rent it out to just anyone, and she didn't want to sell it. So, she basically said to me, can you live in it? And obviously, I'm paying rent, but it's got an 8 acre garden, and I'm not paying anywhere near market rent at all. The rent I'm paying is very similar to the rent we could charge for the property we were living in before. So effectively, we've been able to make a massive jump up insofar as our personal living situation without actually having to feel the financial cost of it. So it's just been a fortuitous, serendipitous, amazing event. And then, so of course I said yes, jumped at the chance, and then it kind of, the weight of this property kind of bore down on me in a good way, that I felt it had to be working. I had to be making the most of it. I couldn't just sit here and mow the lawns, I had to use it. I had to really use it. So that's what we did. And I don't think, if I'm honest, I doubt through any of the previous tenants, I think you'd have to go back quite a number of years before anyone has used this property like we are. I think it's, we're doing everything we can to squeeze all the value out of it. So there's a 1.5 acre wood in the corner of the property. We've got pigs in there. We've got 2 paddocks with goats in. We've got geese. We've got chickens. We've got quite a large vegetable bed. I've planted a food forest, and the food forest might not even come into fruition in the time that we're living here. We might have moved on before then, but it's planted and it's there, and someone will reap the benefit of that at some point. And we're making all of our own dairy. We milk the goats, making our own cheese, all that kind of thing, and it's just a complete change. And if someone had told me I was going to be here 2 years ago, I would have laughed at them. But here we are.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I'm just trying to think of the size because I know how big 1 acre is visually.
Mm-hmm.
So to think 8 acres, like that's substantial. That's a substantial piece of
Yeah, it
property.
is. So the downside of us renting it is we've got an option to buy, and that's our goal at the moment. If we get in a position financially to do so, then we'll buy it, and that's what I hope and believe will happen. But in the meantime, I would say there's probably 2 acres surrounding the house itself, which are very, very formal gardens that were designed by a garden designer, and um, have got lots and lots of formal planting. So we're not able to change much there. So we can keep some hens on the grass, and we've got, there's a few fruit trees, and they're great spaces for the kids to lay in hammocks or play football and things like that. But we can't really do anything very much there. So really what we're left with is the 6 acres outside. And I would say that's comprised of probably 2.5 acres of wood in a strip around the outside, and then 3.5 acres of mixed pasture land with some ornamental trees in. So those 3 acres, we've put probably 1 acre to a food forest and a campsite and, a fire pit and stuff like that. We've got some ponds we've put in. And then the rest of the pasture side is paddocks where we've got geese and goats, and also our vegetable planting beds. And then in the wood, we've got pigs, with probably about an acre of wood that's just left as wilderness at the moment. Half of me doesn't have a use for it, and half of me likes the idea that some of it is left feral.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And did you do it all yourself, like yourself and your wife, or
Yeah,
did you guys?
absolutely everything. So the
Wow.
fencing, dug the ponds, everything ourselves. Where we've got our vegetable beds actually was completely overgrown. It was 6 foot high or more with just brush when we moved in, and now we've got a little polytunnel, strawberry patch, an asparagus patch, some grapevines, and all of our annual vegetable bed is all in an area that you couldn't even walk through.
Wow. So do you do greenhousing as well? Like to extend
Yeah,
your
so
season,
yeah, so
your
we
growing
we use
season?
a polytunnel, but it's the same principle, and we've only got a small one. We have very little disposable income, so everything we do is on a budget, and I'm all about that. I don't believe that budget is a barrier, or it shouldn't be a barrier to anyone. Now, I have spent some money on a few things. The polytunnel was one, but the polytunnel I have, I think, cost around £100. So I'm not sure what the exchange rate is. I guess about 110, 120 US dollars. I don't know what it is in Canada,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not a lot of money. And with that, as you said, we're able to extend our season. We're also able to get much higher yields from some of the Mediterranean plants like tomatoes and peppers and cucumbers and things.
And is it all just for to be self-sustaining? Are you guys doing any kind of sales of that, or like fruit stands, or like
So we
anything
do
like that?
have a little stall on the side of the road, and we call it the egg shop. And if anyone's ever considering doing anything along these lines, certainly the first thing I suggest to focus on is chickens. Get yourself some hens and get some eggs, because the money we make from selling our eggs at the side of the road, that money pays for all of our animal feed. So, and yeah, and that
Oh, wow.
includes our dogs and our pets in the house. So, yeah, that easily. Sorry.
And how do people find you for that? Are you guys on like a busy road, or is it
Not
signage,
at
or?
all. We are on a very, very rural road. I would guess if I stood on the road for an hour, I would expect to see maybe 5 cars pass us. So, but that's enough, you
Wow.
know, because people love the idea of getting eggs from someone who's got back garden hens rather than a barn or
Mhm.
a factory. So that's enough. We do have a little primary school not too far up the road, so we do get a small amount of traffic in the morning and afternoon from the school, and that's we get a lot of our sales from that. But just word of mouth. I mean, people once they pass a little egg shop like that, even if it's not on their route, they remember where it is and they will go out of their way. And then we've started adding to that. So it really depends on the time of year, but in the autumn and winter, we'll be selling jams there now. In the middle of the summer and the autumn, we'll be selling produce from the garden, whether it's, you know, courgettes, zucchinis, whatever we've got that's surplus, tomatoes. And then in the spring, and now we're selling seedlings and things that we've planted, because whenever we grow our plants, we plant 20 seedlings for every plant we're going to want, and then put the rest out to sell. And it all helps, you know. And we
Hmm.
Mhm.
also, because I make a lot of goat's cheese from our goat's milk, and that's a bit of an artisanal product, and it's something that people are quite happy to pay for. Obviously, I can't stick that on the side of the road, but I have a little sign down there, and people can send me a text message or give me a phone call and arrange to come and collect some from the house. And that's goat's cheese, goat's milk, and kombucha that we make, and you know, all sorts of things like that. We've also got bees coming. I've got my hives set up, but we were due to have bees a little while ago now, but because of the pandemic, I've struggled to keep up on that side of things. But that'll be another small revenue stream. We'll be selling honey.
Hmm. That's so my mom raises bees and she has bees and that so she's in a city and her idea was that instead of having a lawn, she would have all plants like
Yeah,
flowers and trees that bees like. And so her bees can
forage.
like basically the yard sustains them. Yeah, they can forage there or they can go off further. So this was our very first year that we've actually purchased honey in I don't know how many years because she brings
Wow.
us vats of it for free when she
Yeah,
comes to visit. And it's so good. It's like so much better
yeah.
than commercial honey. It's and like yeah, we've gone through it so quickly. But yeah, buying it from a store this time was a bit like it just doesn't look the same. It doesn't taste as
Doesn't feel
good.
right. No.
It's just not the same. Yeah,
Yeah.
it doesn't. So, and it's also interesting because she has a severe bee allergy. So you think that would deter
wow.
her. But yeah, no, it doesn't. And she just wears the full gear and she loves her bees.
Didn't I have to call someone to like clear up?
Oh, that is one tip when you do get your bees. Sometimes they swarm and leave
Yeah.
and leave their hive. And then you have to call someone to come either get them. I think the last time it happened, she just let that person collect them and keep them.
Well,
But
at the moment, I'm the person you call. I'm waiting. Everybody, I've given my phone number out, and I'm waiting for someone to call me and say that they've got a swarm, so that I can go and collect them, and they're going to be my new bees.
yeah, exactly. And then yeah, there's like a whole hibernation process. And I don't. Do you get snow where you are?
Yeah, we do.
Yeah,
Not not every year, but most years.
yeah. So hers, she's in more northern Canada, so she gets a lot of snow. So definitely the hibernation process is a bit tricky, and she has to take care of them. But
Hmm.
yeah, I think that's I think it's definitely a great thing to have. It's nothing I would have ever thought that the average person would do, but now that I see her doing it and being in the city, it's just yeah, it's amazing what you can do. So, do you have any advice? Like I know you have a big plot of land, but for people that are really like for instance to your former self that just had that like 5 by 5 garden, what would you have done with that space to at least get some sort of self-sufficiency?
Yeah, well, even in that small space, we still had hens. We always had hens, and we also had a very, very small vegetable garden, and we also had some edible perennials. So one of the things so these are all things that I'm huge on, and I'll take them one piece at a time if you don't mind, the three different sort of sides of
Sure.
what I've just mentioned. So the first one is hens. If you've got space in your garden to put a bathtub, and I'm using that because it's something everyone can visualize for size. If
Hmm.
you've got space in your room, in your garden for something the size of a bathtub, then you've got space to have 3 or 4 bantams, which are basically half-size chickens that are going to lay eggs. They are the best pets. They're so friendly. They're
Hmm.
easy to look after. They're hilarious, absolutely hilarious to watch. And you can, in just that small space, you can keep 2 or 3 hens very, very happy. And if it depends how much involvement you want. If you want to go out and let them out onto your garden all day and put them away at night, you can. But that's enough space for them, and you can get something you can move around. But if you're even remotely considering getting chickens, then I can tell you, you need chickens. You absolutely need chickens. If you're even considering it, get them because they will enhance your life. They are the least needy animal there is, and they deliver you eggs. These beautiful tasting free range eggs. And if you buy free range eggs in a supermarket, they're not free range eggs. They are that, you know, in terms of the legal wording and what have you, and they may well come from very happy hens, but they're not proper free range hens that are on grass, that have grass under their feet. And the taste is completely different. So if you're thinking about getting hens and you've got space for something the size of a bathtub in your garden, get hens. You can do it. Second
Hmm.
one is just growing annual vegetables. And again, this is something you can do. You can, if you live in a flat and you don't even have a balcony, you can grow a little cherry tomato plant in a pot on your window. And if that's all you can do, then that's what you should do. But wherever you are, you've got space for something, and it might even just be a pot of herbs or something. But everyone does have the ability to grow something that they can eat, and I just think whatever you start with is irrelevant. Just start with something because it might not be for you, and you might decide that you don't ever want to do it again, and that's great. That's fine, but it might be something for you, and it might be something you get this in immense insane pleasure from, that reconnection with where your food comes from, that it might spark something in you that you want to do more and more and more. So at least try, at least have a go, at least do something, just start something. And there's very little that you can't grow in containers. So I, even now with all this space, I grow carrots in containers. Most people don't grow carrots in containers. I personally find that there's a neat trick I use that I get great yields, and it's just so easy versus planting them in the ground. So I choose to grow them in containers, but there's nothing you can't grow in containers. So just grow something and get started. And then finally, edible perennials. Now, this does take a garden. This probably isn't going to work quite so well in a flat, although there are some things you can do in containers. But edible perennials is basically, to those non-gardeners that I'm speaking Greek to, a perennial is a plant that just comes back year after year after year. Now, I've got this fantastic space. I'm able to plant trees and a food forest and a big asparagus bed and things like that. But even in a small space, you can plant some beautiful berry bushes. So you could plant whatever your thing is. You know, if you like gooseberries, plant one gooseberry bush. If you like making rhubarb crumble, plant a rhubarb plant. And these are plants that are going to come back every year. You don't need to replant them. They're just plants that are going to give and give and give. And edible perennials, if there's a perennial version of something versus an annual version of something, I'm going for the perennial version all day long because
Hmm.
we're getting more out, putting less in. And, you know, it's about, for people with smaller spaces, it's great to have these perennial plants that just take care of themselves. And then you don't feel like you're giving your whole garden over to a vegetable plot because perhaps it's just, you know, a bed down the side that is an ornamental shrub bed, but your ornamental shrubs happen to contain some beautiful berry plants.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm interested. So, in any of your podcasts, do you talk about your tips for the carrots?
I'm sure I have. I'm sure I have, but I'll do it again here. So
Sure.
right, so basically if you're growing carrots, there are two problems. a carrot, it grows exactly as you think. So you put the seed in the ground, and if you imagine this, that seed would form basically at the top of what we think of as a carrot when we buy one in the supermarket. So it's going to go down and it's going to get thick, and then above it you've got the foliage. But if your ground is hard, or it's got stones in it, or it's got lumps of something or bits of root, that carrot is going to twist and struggle, and it's going to be really odd shaped, and it might split, and it might end up looking more like a milking stool with 3 little spindly roots coming out. Rather, so what I used to do, and what does work really well if you want to put the effort in, I used to get a crowbar, and I would ram my crowbar down into the ground and make a nice big opening the size and length of the carrot that I wanted. And then I would fill that with compost that would be very, very loose. And then I would plant my carrot seed on top of that. And then what would happen was the carrots would form where that loose material was, and you'd get these beautiful long carrots. But that's so much work for 2 reasons. One, all the work you can already imagine by me saying it. But the second one is that carrot seeds are so small. It's so difficult to separate them. And putting one carrot seed exactly where you want it is a real pain. So now I don't do any of that. What I do is I get a big container, I fill it with compost, very, very loose compost. I don't compact anything. And then I just sprinkle my carrot seeds all on the top so that they're overcrowded. And then I put maybe another 1 centimeter or less of compost over the top of that. That's it. Then I water it. That's my carrots planted. And that takes probably 2 or 3% of the amount of time and effort for planting the same number of carrots. And then what happens is, because all the soil is loose, they're just going to form perfectly, but they're overcrowded. But that suits me, because what I do is when the carrots are about 1 inch thick, I start thinning them, and I take a load out and I use them as baby carrots that I cook whole.
Mm-hmm.
And then I gradually thin my pots out as the season goes on. So I just harvest, rather than thinning out and wasting, I just harvest carrots at all the different stages of life. And then by the end of the season, they've, given me a proper full harvest at the end, as well as all these little intermediate croppings that I've had. But it's the effort that's required in planting that I've really gained in using that method. Don't know anyone else that does it, but this is the only way I'll ever grow carrots now. The other advantage is in pulling them, because when you pull your carrots out the ground, if you snap them, they give off a smell that the dreaded carrot fly can smell from probably a different planet away. They just seem to always know, and then they'll come in, and then you'll have all sorts of problems with any other carrots that you've got left in the ground. Whereas because everything's so loose, they just pull straight out without snapping, and they don't give off that scent that attracts the pest.
Yeah, so that's when I was a child, I lived on what we call a hobby farm, which I think is the same thing they would like call kind of what you're doing now.
Mm-hmm.
So it's usually a self-sustaining farm,
Mm-hmm.
and very little. It's not a commercial farm. You just sell off what you don't use,
Yeah.
but for the most part, it's not your main income. And so I did live on one of those when I was a child, and now it's always romanticized in my mind, and I always kind of want to go back to that, right? Because it was such a
Mm-hmm.
good time. And my mom's just avid, even like when we've lived in the city, she's always growing something or finding some way to be self-sufficient. And my sister has that same thing. But I find whenever I've tried, it's failed miserably. And where we live now, we only get direct sunlight in the morning. So we're about to move. So I'm feeling inspired to do it again. So the carrots is, I think we could do. Do you have any tips and tricks for kale? I just get overrun with aphids, and then it's done. That was it.
Right.
I'm just pest ridden.
Well, one thing that you can do, I won't lie, we don't have that problem. Our kale it just gets on with it, and it requires no intervention from me. We do get the odd bit of pest damage, but we're growing so much of it, we don't mind. There's not enough that it's going to decimate the crop. But what you can do, if aphids are your problem, and if you are trying to be organic, is you can make your own bug spray, and it's super simple. So what we do you are you familiar with the horse chestnut tree, the conker tree?
No.
No.
So you don't have conkers. Let me just think. Well, then you'll have to do a little bit of Googling. But maybe they don't grow that far north. I know that most of the temperate northern hemisphere does. But there's a tree called the horse chestnut tree, but there are lots of other trees, and rosemary is another plant. But any plant that contains a chemical called saponins is basically soap. So we use the horse chestnut tree, but you can use any organic soap. You can even buy soap and use that from your local supermarket if you want. And you mix soap with oil with chili, and you just mix them together and then spray that on. And obviously we can use the oil that we generate here and the soap that we create from horse chestnut leaves and some chili powder that we've grown in the garden, mix it together, and you've got this amazing anti-bug spray for pretty much any plant. It's not going to damage any plants. You can spray it on the food, and then just as long as you rinse your food when you bring it in, it's not going to do you any harm. And the 99% of your garden pests are going to be dealt with a simple spray of this.
Wow.
Well, that's good to know.
Yeah. So
yeah, we're gonna.
the oil and the soap together are the two things that really do that make it sort of stay on the leaf, and then the chili and the soap are the two that stop the pests. Sorry.
Mm-hmm. So, do you have? Does that work with? Do you grow potatoes as well?
We do grow potatoes, and again, we don't have any problems with pests on our potato plants. Something we have to be careful of is blight, but then everybody does. But the main rule for not having your nightshades succumb to blight is just crop rotation. So we do rotate our crops around our beds.
Mm. Yeah. So I I don't know in this province where we are if we'll have the same problem, but we were thinking of growing potatoes. But I remember as a kid, potato bugs were just a horrible pest. But when we had chickens, we just let the chickens go and they just eat them all. So I just don't, yeah, I just don't know like pest wise. But I guess if the spray works, we could use that on the potatoes as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would be stunned if you contacted me in 8 months and told me that you tried it and it didn't work. I'd be very, very surprised. So give it a go for sure. But ducks are another good pest deterrent, so they'll clear up all your slug problems. Indian runner ducks are a particularly good breed. They tend to eat the bugs without doing too much damage to your crops. But whenever you're using any kind of fowl to act as pest control, you have to be very careful as to what they will and won't actually eat themselves that you don't want them to. So
Mm-hmm.
definitely something to bear in mind.
Yeah, so we're moving like just in a few days here to a new place. We've been in a tiny kind of apartment in downtown Vancouver for a lot of years, and now we're going outside the city. And I think we have like three areas in the house that probably run the gamut of what city living growers would have. So we have um, a balcony that's fairly wide that apparently gets sun kind of around the clock.
Yeah,
Yeah, southern exposure.
that's
Southern
good.
exposure.
Yeah.
So we have all sun, and it's a decent size as far as balconies go. We also have a backyard that I'm not good with measurement, but like how big would you say that is?
I would say the same, like a 5 meter by 5 meter. It might be a little bit longer than that, but there's a tree, so
Yeah, about 5 by 5, and it looks like we probably get half sun maybe
Sure,
because we have a tree there, so it gets some
sure.
shade. And then we're gonna have a really large, like a two-car garage that's more of like a rec room style. So obviously dark, but a lot of space where we could maybe grow stuff in buckets or anything. So let's say for all three of those, what would you recommend as like starting points?
Well, for your balcony, I would say get yourself some herbs. Do you do much cooking?
yeah, we especially now with quarantine, we cook all our
Yeah, so
meals.
get yourself a herb garden. I've got a herb garden, and it's the one thing I have installed in the formal gardens around the kitchen. So get yourself a herb garden on the balcony, because that's where you're going to want the herbs, where you can just quickly, go and get them. And then depending on, I'm not sure what sort of climate you'll have, but if you think you can grow some tomatoes, then I would definitely go for them on the balcony as well. Perhaps you can bring them in overnight if they're in pots. Then in the garden, get yourself some bantams, some bantam hens, Absolutely. There's no way in the world I'd be without them. And then I suppose it really depends how much work you wanted to put in with regards to, creating a vegetable plot versus just having pots and planters. But there's really nothing you couldn't grow. It's difficult for me to, when I recommend things, I always say, have a look at what's in your shopping basket every week, because those are the things
Hmm.
you're going to want to grow. And there's very little that you can't either grow that or grow something very, very similar to it. Like if you like root vegetables, beetroots are going to be super easy and super quick. And I mean, when I was growing up, beetroot was this horrible thing that was always in jars and tasted of vinegar, and it was just disgusting because that was the only vinegar, the only beetroot I'd ever tried. But when you have
Hmm.
it fresh and you just slice it up or cube it and then bake it in the oven and serve it as a regular vegetable to have with meat and it's delicious. It's delicious raw in salads. And this amazing, delicious vegetable was just lost on me. I never even knew this is how it could taste, But so beetroot, I'm a huge advocate of, because you're going to have the cooler climate. You're going to do well with lettuce, and lots of leafy greens are going to do very well for you. So I would definitely go for a cut and come again lettuce selection, and that could be in a pot or directly in the ground. And again, as I've mentioned, so a couple of edible perennials. So whatever berries that you like, strawberries are great and they propagate so freely that you're going to have as many strawberry plants as you know how to do with, as you know what to do with in no time. If you just buy one or two, they send out little runners, and every year each plant will give you 5 new ones for the following year. Um, yeah, so anything along those lines, but it really comes down to what you enjoy eating.
I don't know. So we have something we call an English cucumber.
Right.
I don't know if you just call it a cucumber, but
That would make sense, wouldn't it?
we have English cucumbers that we really
Yeah.
enjoy. Have you had any luck growing
Yeah.
cucumbers? Like they're the long ones that are often in salads. They're
Yeah.
not the ones that are used to
Well,
make
I can
pickles.
confirm that we call them cucumbers. So that's confirmed.
No, do you know of any like Canadian
No,
cucumbers?
no, I don't. But we do. So I'm assuming in your head you've got English cucumbers, which are, as you say, the long ones that you have in salads, and then you've got smaller ones that would usually be used in pickles. Is that right? So
Yeah, and they're like
yeah, so the
funkier.
smaller ones that would usually be, we call them gherkins.
Uh, we call them
There you go.
cucumbers.
So I'll have to tell my wife that gherkins are actually Canadian cucumbers.
Yeah, let's start that. Hashtag Canadian cucumber.
But yeah, so cucumbers, yes, but not only. Realistically, we only grow them in the polytunnel. So we could grow the plant outside. It would be a really short season, and the yields would be bordering on pathetic. We might get one or two from a plant, whereas inside we'll get tens from a plant. It could be 20, it could be 15, it could be 25 from each plant. Could be more than that. So, if I plant them in the greenhouse and I've got nice fertile soil with everything they need in, then 3 plants will be that give us all the cucumbers we can use. They're not very good piece of produce for preserving, so there's no point in really
Mhm.
creating more than you're going to be able to eat at the time. So 3 plants, 2 or 3 plants is plenty for us in the polytunnel. So that's how we grow them. I don't think that we would do very well with them outside. So I don't. I think I only tried in our first year, and I don't. I think the actual plant died. I don't think we had much success. So I would only suggest growing them in a polytunnel or a greenhouse. So what temperatures do you get there? What's your average sort of in the summer? Do you get frosts?
It's very
Not in the summer, but our growing season's quite short where
it's
we
very
are,
similar to England from what we've
Okay,
gathered and talking to people.
except more
right.
snow. Like our winters
Yeah,
are
yeah.
colder.
So
Yeah.
our last frost date is, it depends on where you are in the country, but ours is early May. So up until May, anything you plant out that's frost tender, that isn't going to survive a frost, you have to kind of take care of and look after and cover up overnight if we get a frost. So is it about the same with you, May, at some point?
Yeah, same. Everything we usually start inside prior to that
Yeah.
date in preparation to move it
Yeah, so it does
outside.
sound like the growing season is very similar, which is really what it comes down to is the growing season, the time between frosts. I actually did a podcast very recently on the USDA hardiness zones and how you can transfer them to where you are and what they mean. And it's not the be all and end all, the hardiness zones. They're set on the minimum winter temperature. That's all they actually tell you. They don't tell you anything about season length. They don't tell you anything about daylight hours. There's a lot more that goes into what you can grow and what you can't. So even though people, and certainly I did, I think Canada, I think, right, well, I know how the USDA zones work and I know you're up. So, you'd expect it to be whatever whatever they can't grow in the worst parts of the US, you're going to struggle to grow, but it doesn't necessarily work that way.
Yeah, I think that's the issue here, especially in the cities, much as I assume in England, is that one, a lot of people don't have direct sunlight, and two, a lot of people don't have an outdoor space. So what if we only had like the garage and we didn't get much sunlight? What would be your suggestions? How would we start with
Well, there
that?
are some plants that are quite happy to grow in the shade. So spinach and some of your lettuces and things like that, they're quite happily grow in not complete shade, but certainly a lot of shade. So there's something called Malabar spinach, which is a perennial spinach. It's not actually a spinach, but you use it like a spinach, and it's called Malabar spinach, and that will grow in almost complete shade. We planted some of that in our food forest to grow underneath some of our trees up there. So I don't have a massive list of them to hand in my head, but there are plants that will do okay in the shade. Every green plant is going to need some amount of sunlight because they need it for the chlorophyll to photosynthesize and create the energy and sugars that they need. But it doesn't have to be direct sunlight. We get a certain amount of ambient sunlight, even if we're not in direct sunlight, from the sunlight bouncing off other things. So there are, and that's what we would say, a shade-loving plant. They're still going to be photosynthesizing, but they're going to be doing it with that indirect sunlight. So daylight hours are important, even if you're not getting the direct sunlight. But it's really a case of just researching individual plants from the short list of things that you eat.
Do you use lights?
No, we don't. No, not at all. The only for if we're hatching chicks, we might use some. But no, we don't use any kind of lights for our plants.
And so I assume like a lot of the fruits and vegetables season has already started. If you were starting today or not even today in a few weeks, what are the things that we could still grow and have a decent season?
Clearly asking for ourselves.
Well, okay.
Yeah. Well, anyone who would listen, who's like
anyone who's
inspired
listening,
now.
get a pen because there's plenty of things that you could be putting in 3 or 4 weeks' time still and get a crop from. So there are lots of French beans, bush beans. So you've got bush beans and pole beans. Bush beans grow in a short little bush, maybe a foot high at the most, whereas pole beans, they want something to climb up. Bush beans are going to go from planting a bean to harvesting a bean in maybe 2 months. So you could still get those in a few weeks' time. Lettuce, 6 weeks. And there are lots of varieties, different varieties. Radish, if you like radish, you're talking 3 weeks sometimes from planting a seed to harvesting the plant. Carrots are a fairly quick crop. They're not super quick, but you could be getting carrots in 2 or 3 weeks. We do what's called, what's the word? It's escaped me now, but when we don't plant everything at once, so we're continually adding carrot seeds so that we've always got that crop later in the year. So succession planting. So I don't know why it escaped me. So, and the same with lettuce. You know, I've got a bed that's given to our salad greens and our lettuce, and I plant 6 lettuce every week, and then keep planting 6 lettuce every week or 2 through the season, because they're a quick crop. Beetroot, I've mentioned it already, but it's another quick, fantastic crop. Turnips, they're something, again, you're probably talking 5 to 6 weeks for the small baby turnips. So there's quite there, you know, there's a lot that you can still be getting in the ground, or even in a few weeks' time have time to get in the ground. And that's all without a greenhouse.
Okay. That's a good place for us
Do
to
it.
start, I guess. Figure out how we're gonna do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was just actually on the phone with my sister earlier today asking her because she has a balcony and she's growing so much on it. And that's why I was complaining about. I'm like, oh, the season's already over. And she was trying to convince me that it's not. But I think I'm a bit more
Yeah.
convinced now. Like 2 people
Oh,
have told me it's not
definitely. I
over
mean,
yet.
even so, you know, we've been gardening forever. You know, we don't stop all through the winter. We were planting garlic in December, but even us, I've still got plans to be planting things every week, probably right through till the end of June, right into July. I'll be planting things every week. So there's
Mhm.
plenty of time left.
Well, I'm on it. I feel inspired. This has been great. I could really continue talking to you all day because like just the way I grew up and the way like my mom is about she really believes in being able to provide for yourself at
Yep.
least on some level. So there's definitely always been goals for that. I think as we shift away from our urban lifestyle, we'll piece by piece just continue to grow. I guess same as you did. Like it's not an all or nothing thing and it's
No,
not
just
all
do
at once.
something and enjoy it. And that's the most important thing, is enjoy it. Only do the things that you're enjoying doing. If you're not enjoying it, stop, because there's plenty to choose from, you know? There's plenty you can do. Find the things you enjoy and do those, because that's how you'll carry on doing it, and that's how you'll get the most out of it.
Hmm. So how can people find you? Because I think now, especially, there's so many topics. I think people would love to come, and you have a really great way of explaining it and making it easy to digest. So how
Well,
can they
the
find you?
easiest way to find my content is just to search for Self-Sufficient Hub. So we are Self-Sufficient Hub on YouTube, where I've got lots and lots of videos on all kinds of things, from the things I'm doing around here, but also a lot of foraging videos. Mushroom foraging is something we haven't touched on today, but it's something I'm very keen on. Lots of identification videos of how to identify mushrooms. Then you can also find the podcast, which is again Self-Sufficient Hub podcast, which is available wherever people get their podcasts. And we tend to talk about one subject based on self-sufficiency. So it might be perennial vegetables, for example. It might be how to protect your plants from the frost. But there's lots of content out there on the podcast, and I release an episode every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And then there is selfsufficienthub.com, which is my website. It's not that up to date at the moment, but hopefully I'll be updating it very soon, because I've been focusing on the podcast and the YouTube and getting as much content out there as I can. And I'm just reaching the point now where I'm going to be bringing that all together on the website. And then finally, you can actually find us on Facebook as well. Again, search Self-Sufficient Hub, and we've got a Facebook page and a new Facebook group that we are going to be launching very, very soon. And hopefully that's going to be a great place to have these kind of conversations. And finally, if I may, if anyone wants to contact me directly, you can send an email to selfsufficientcontact@gmail.com. Self-sufficient contact, all one word, @gmail.com.
Do you guys have an Instagram? Because I feel like you guys could kill it with all the content you can make out of just, you must be able to have such cool images
No,
of the whole
Instagram is something
property.
I haven't done. So I'm like I am the opposite of the social media guy. I am the opposite of that.
Right.
So it took me a long, long time really to come around to using Facebook, but I've just started doing that, and I there's all sorts of things I'd like to do. Ultimately it comes down to time and my ability to take on extra things, like with the website and the uploading the videos and the editing, and it all takes time, and that's time I'm not working in the garden or whatever. So I appreciate the what you just said, and I genuinely do take it on board, because I hadn't heard that before really. I mean I knew Instagram was a thing. I'm not that much of a caveman. I knew that Instagram existed, but I didn't know that it would necessarily suit me particularly. But maybe I'll look into that a bit more.
I think you do really, really well. And I am, I guess, a little bit of the opposite of you, with not too much in the field experience and a lot of social media experience. And I would personally, if it was me, I would be focusing more on that
Okay.
than on Facebook. Because I just think the reach you could have with just like the beautiful images you can craft of all your plants and animals, and the way you could story tell, even, if you, I don't know if you guys put your kids online and involve them in any way, but I can just imagine your Instagram wall, and I
Right.
bet it
Well,
would
I
be
will
amazing.
definitely, and I'm not just saying this, definitely take that on board, and have a bit of a think.
Yeah, just even like just scroll through, like look for like the self-sufficient hashtags and just see what other people are doing. I think you'll probably
Awesome.
get
Yeah, we'll do.
inspired.
Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. This was really fun, and I have so many more questions. I'm definitely, now that I know how to find you on Facebook, I think I'm the opposite. I got rid of Facebook and went to Instagram, so
Right.
I think I'll have to I'll have to go back to
Uh,
Facebook
And
now.
then maybe we can, in like 3 weeks, when we're
Yeah,
freaking out because none of our planting is
No,
working,
but
we'll have
it
you
would be
back on.
it would be
what
my
are we doing
pleasure.
wrong?
I'd be delighted to come back on. But definitely reach out on Facebook and say hi.
I
Awesome, we
will.
will. Thank
Pleasure.
you so
Thank
much,
you.
And
Carl.
you. Bye
Have
bye.
a great day.